Mr. Regis Chapman, head of the Office of Regis of the World Food Program, Ms. Sarah Bailey, Program Manager of Preparedness and Response of the World Food Program, distinguished set of panelists, and my colleague, Mr. Giampiero Leoncini, country representative of Trinidad and Tobago and the English Caribbean for CAF. It is my pleasure to give you a warm welcome to this webinar to basically talk about a very, very relevant topic, impact of COVID-19 on food security and livelihoods in the English-speaking Caribbean, as well as the role of social protection in national response efforts. This is a co-organized webinar jointly by the World Food Program and CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, an institution that is comprised by 19 country members, 17 of those from Latin America and the Caribbean, plus Spain and Portugal. Just some brief words to introduce this webinar. Let me start by saying that even before COVID-19 pandemic hit our lives, the data already showed that Latin America and the Caribbean region, as well as, safe to say, most of the emerging economies in the world, was not on track to achieve the zero hunger goal as conceived by the SDG 2 by 2030. Let's recall SDG 2 within the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda is eager to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, as well as promote sustainable agriculture by year 2030. Let me back this idea with some facts. Even though there is more than enough food produced in the world, and particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, a region that is frequently called to be a supplier of food for the world, by year 2019, about 690 million people in the world were considered hungry or undernourished. We're talking about 8.9% of the world population, again, on a pre-COVID situation, that were considered hungry. 50 million of those were in Latin America and the Caribbean. So that means that the situation of undernourishment, as measured by the proportion of the population that does not receive sufficient energy from the food for an active and healthy life, shows an increasing challenge for the Caribbean, with the prevalence of 16.6% of the total Caribbean population. As for the average in Latin America, that accounts for 6.7%. In addition, some numbers, the rate of stunting, that is, children that are too short for their age as a result of chronic malnutrition, accounted again in 2019, so that is on a pre-COVID situation, for a prevalence in the Caribbean of 8.1% of the total children under 5 years old. So this is quite a challenge. Then we, and of course, with the still very active COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean region, achieving the zero hunger goal looks even more distant than before. So the pandemic brings to the equation some additional challenges for the proper nutrition. We're seeing families struggle to buy basic foods and also to buy basic medicine, as livelihoods are destroyed and the number of people out of work in the region is increasing rapidly and significantly. We're seeing a crisis of affordability for a proper nutrition, while the region is not properly backed by effective and inclusive social protection systems. So having said this session is of significant value for CAF, as it represents the opportunity to share a common understanding as well as experiences from the Caribbean that can contribute to the definition and implementation of an effective agenda to offset an increasing food insecurity threat for the region. Finally, I wish to thank and acknowledge the enormous support and great human and technical quality of the region team of the World Food Program, with which we're strengthening cooperation for the years to come. Thank you very much. I wish you a very successful and rewarding webinar.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'd also like to extend our sincere thanks to CAF for their partnership in bringing forward this important discussion, and in particular, Mr. Julian Suarez, Vice President of Sustainable Development at CAF. I'd also like to thank our distinguished panelists, who you'll be hearing from shortly, for agreeing to share their important perspectives from the Caribbean. The World Food Programme re-engaged in the English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean during the 2017 hurricane season, and we formalized our office in Barbados in mid-2018, and we're focused on a number of key areas, including providing technical assistance and capacity strengthening in the areas of emergency preparedness, readiness, and response, building on our global excellence and end-to-end supply chain management in emergencies. We're strengthening social protection systems through the lens of defining, developing, and enhancing its role in times of crisis. This is largely through promoting ex-ante preparedness investments in systems and programs, which not only benefit and improve social protection's role in responding to shocks, but also improves the normal time running of social protection. We're supporting these efforts by developing innovative disaster risk finance models and applying our food security and vulnerability analytical capacities. We're strengthening food systems with a particular emphasis on ensuring that the voices of smallholder farmers are adequately incorporated. And finally, we respond to crises when they occur and when national governments and regional partners require additional support. Now, in the context of COVID-19, it became immediately clear that one, the socioeconomic impacts in the Caribbean were going to be significant given the high levels of debt and the singularity of economies. And two, social protection would be a key part of the response. WFP worked with the CARICOM Secretariat to launch a COVID-19 Food Security and Livelihoods survey in April, and we followed this up with the second round of surveys in July. And these surveys were both made possible by ECHO and USAID. Now, the results of the survey highlighted disruptions in livelihoods are continuing, although with reported less frequency in July when compared to April. Nonetheless, more households reported job loss and reduced income. The most marked differences are found across income groups, with 73% of respondents with well below average income reporting livelihood disruptions, compared to 35% of those respondents with well above average incomes. About 2/3 of respondents with less stable household income sources, such as informal labor, petty trade, or relying on support from friends and family, reported their livelihoods being affected, compared to half of those households that reported salaries as their main source of income. Migrant populations were particularly heavily impacted in terms of their livelihoods. And there were also some differences across age groups of respondents as well as household composition, but the regional averages did not show any significant differences between women and men. Now, the deepening of the crisis can be reflected in the food security related findings of these studies. So while there's been an increased availability of food and other items in markets relative to April 2020, most people are also reporting increased food prices, with 20% more respondents indicating this in July compared to April. Shopping habits have shifted as well. In April, in the panic of the initial days of the pandemic, people bought more and as a result had more food in stock at home. Over time, prices have risen, people have less income, and the ability to stockpile food and other essentials is greatly reduced. The fact that households are managing with less income and there is still disruption of livelihoods and food prices are higher, we're now seeing how that has translated to people's ability to maintain their eating habits. The graph on the right reflects the increasing reliance on negative coping strategies. We're seeing an increase in either those who skipped meals or ate less than usual, or even went an entire day without food. This is particularly the case of the lowest income group, where a staggering 16% reported having gone an entire day over the last 7 days without having eaten anything. In short, while initial concerns regarding a major supply chain disruption did not necessarily occur to the degree that some had feared, food insecurity is increasing simply because people cannot afford to eat. Now, based on the assessments, we estimate that 407,000 people in the English-speaking Caribbean are severely food insecure, and another 2.5 million are moderately food insecure. The number of severe food insecure has remained consistent across the 2 survey rounds, but the moderately food insecure has nearly doubled between April and July. And this reflects, again, the deepening of the crisis. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, and again, thank you to CAF for the partnership and bringing this together. And I'd like to pass it now over to Sarah Bailey, the WFP Caribbean Head of Program, to explain the role social protection is playing in responding to these impacts.
Thank you, Regis. When we consider the wide-ranging impacts of COVID-19 on food security and nutrition security and people's ability to earn a living, it's crucial to this discussion are the programs and measures that governments can use to lessen the impacts on people, especially those who are already living in poverty and facing pre-existing vulnerabilities. Social protection is a powerful tool to address the risks and shocks that people face throughout their life cycle. It includes safety nets such as cash transfers, public assistance programs, social insurance, and labor market interventions as well. And often when we think about social protection and shocks, we think about the roles that social protection plays when addressing the shocks that a person or a family might face. So for example, if someone loses their job, or cash transfers to assist a family's well-being and ensure that they can get out of poverty. But increasingly, social protection is also being used to address some larger scale shocks, including COVID-19, but also disasters such as hurricanes. So these events that impact a large number of people and their well-being at once. And we refer to this role of social protection as shock responsive social protection, and sometimes it's described as adaptive social protection. So the WFP Caribbean Office has been undertaking a 3-year research program on shock responsive social protection in the Caribbean. And the goal here is to build evidence and lessons and learning on what factors enable social protection to be more responsive to shocks and be more effective at playing this role. We've also been providing financial, technical, and operational support to government partners to assist people whose food insecurity, whose well-being, and whose general livelihoods have been impacted by COVID-19. So we've been working with governments to assist these people through social protection. And we'll have some people talking about this a bit more later in our esteemed panel. But in St. Lucia, we're supporting the Ministry of Equity, Social Justice, Empowerment, Youth Development, Sports, and Local Government to reach an additional 1,000 households, on the public assistance program, as well as to provide an increased transfer values for persons living with HIV/AIDS. And in British Virgin Islands, we're working closely with the Ministry of Health and Social Development in order to put in place operational tools to be at the ready to be able to meet these needs with social protection, or meet the needs resulting from COVID-19 through social protection. And in Dominica, our staff are working with the government to increase the transfer values for people who are already part of the public assistance program, but also to expand to new individuals who may not be part of the program and who've been impacted. So to identify and to reach these people. Now, shock responsive social protection may be a new term, but it's not a new approach in the Caribbean, as again, I believe our panel members will be pointing out later with their experiences. There are examples actually that go back 15 years with governments turning to social protection and longer in response to hurricanes, in response to the 2008 financial crisis, and in response to other events. Now, with COVID-19, what we're seeing is a large increase in the number of responses, with many governments in the English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean turning to social protection as a tool to address the impacts on livelihoods and on food security. And so if you look to the right of this slide, you'll see the large number of governments who are indeed right now using social protection in response to COVID-19. Now, in total, most of these governments, and so we looked at 22 countries and territories, and these are the ones that our office covers, and all of them have introduced measures through social protection in response to COVID-19. Now, of these, 21 have actually introduced new programs, 15 have modified existing programs, mainly social assistance, and also social security. Now, the target populations of new and expanded programs have primarily been individuals and businesses whose incomes have been impacted But we're also seeing the use of food assistance to vulnerable populations, modifications to school feeding programs, as well as payroll subsidies. Now, when considering this vast growing experience of governments, there's actually four main ways that social protection is being utilized. So the first one is to make adjustments to programs and systems, simply to adapt to the new realities. So for example, moving forward payments in some instances so that people receive their benefits sooner, but also modifications to school feeding programs. A second way that the programs are being utilized is to provide more benefits to existing beneficiaries. So people who have been impacted, who are already in need of assistance, may need more assistance at this time. A third one is actually to extend to new people through an existing program. And a fourth one, which is the most common, at least in this instance in response to COVID-19, is creating entirely new programs, but that are building on existing systems. So I'd like to close with a few points that may provide food for thought on some emerging lessons. And the first is that there really has been a dramatic increase in experience, which gives us so much ground for new learning and for sharing lessons. And while cash transfers have been a common tool within this, including for meeting food needs, we're seeing diverse and creative ways to meet the needs of different groups, which I'm sure we'll hear more about shortly. And including with the food needs, we're not only seeing cash transfers, but also vouchers, in-kind assistance, and modifications to school feeding programs. Now, in all cases, this is never about social protection alone, but about the role that social protection plays as part of broader strategies for economic recovery and for meeting the needs of vulnerable populations. And finally, they all show that the perfect social protection systems are by no means a prerequisite for using social protection to respond to shocks. But there are also opportunities to strengthen social protection, and in particular to invest in the role that social protection could play in response to future shocks. And this could mitigate some challenges and bottlenecks that may be occurring. But today we're also being joined by some esteemed government officials who are spearheading many of these efforts, who are the best place to talk about their experiences and some of the emerging lessons. And so I'll hand over to my colleague Juliette, who will be continuing with the panel.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're pleased to commence our panel discussion by welcoming our panelists, government representatives from the English-speaking Caribbean and territories, from British Virgin Islands, Jamaica, St. Lucia, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. We look forward to hearing about their experience in the use of social protection in response to the increasing needs given the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19. We will start in the south of the Caribbean with the twin islands of Trinidad and Tobago, represented here by Mr. Vijay Gangapersad. Mr. Gangapersad is the Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. He holds a degree in social work and has dedicated his professional and personal life in the service to the people of Trinidad and Tobago through 20 years in the field of social development, in the public service, and through projects in his community. Mr. Gangapersad, please proceed.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure sharing the Trinidad and Tobago experience. I do recognize, I think, a Jamaican curry. I hope I'm correct. So in the consideration of developing our social protection strategy in Trinidad and Tobago, two significant events were looked at. We recognize that early in the day, the supply chain was broken. Though Trinidad and Tobago registered its first COVID-19 case on the 12th of March, 2020, we chose instead to use an effective date for our system as the 1st of March, 2020. And this was primarily as a result of the supply chain being broken, as well as the lockdown, the measures implemented to reduce the spread of the COVID-19. What we saw earlier o'clock in the day was the need for financial support, of course, nutrition and food, as well as a number of persons out there required some sort of psychosocial support to deal with the many emergent issues as a result of the COVID-19. What the ministry sought to do was very much in line with what was just presented. We would have enhanced several social protection measures in the ministry. We did not introduce any new ones. Primarily the public assistance grant program. We also have a food support program. We have a rental assistance program. We also use non-governmental and faith-based organization through subvention, as well as for counseling support. We would have utilized the services of the National Family Services Program of the ministry. What we offered primarily was income support to persons who are either retrenched, terminated, or who experience reduced income effective 1st of March 2020. And that was initial support for 3 months. We also provided food support for an initial period of 3 months as well for first-time applicants. And the food support was provided through a top-up, providing additional support to existing beneficiaries of the public assistance program as well as the food support program. We recognize that there would have been persons out there who would have applied for grants, and the grants may not have been processed as yet, mainly the old age pension, which is the senior citizen pension. We gave them support as well for a period of 3 months. Persons who applied for disability assistance grant as well, we gave them food support for 3 months. We worked through NGOs to provide food support as well to needy families in closer to the NGOs. We also work with various members of parliament, the 41 members of parliament, and provided additional food support to families who had children who were registered in the school feeding program as an immediate food support measure, and recognizing that persons may not have been able to come out of their home during the lockdown period. We worked with the various municipalities, the 14 municipalities across the country. What we did as a ministry, we provided them with 100 hamper each. The process allowed for persons to call in a hotline that we created especially for these persons. They call in the hotline, and once they were deemed eligible, we contacted the municipality and they delivered the food directly to the person's home. We also provided rental assistance grant, recognizing that persons would have been renting, and as a result of that would have been highly vulnerable to eviction. Some of the changes we would have made is that certainly we had the executive of the Ministry of Social Development providing oversight. We created, because of the existing social protection system, the administrative arrangement had to stay in place to manage the over 170,000 families that we had in the current system. So we created a parallel system that worked through all our regional offices to ensure that application under the COVID support was taken and processed. We enlisted volunteers, which included public servant officers from various ministries and the private sector, to support these this parallel system. And of course, we engage a private provider to assist us in terms of validating data entry and processing application that came through online. We actually had an online service for applications to come through, which was some of the changes that we had to make to the system to facilitate speedy resolution of application. However, what we recognize is that 54% of the applicants came online, 46% depended on the paper-based and walking through our offices to submit application. What we did as well is recognizing that the need was urgent. The usual process for investigation and validating these applications was not used. We instead utilize a system where we ask persons to provide recommenders from a list of reputable recommenders that allowed us as well as the swearing-up declaration that allowed us to circumvent the need for a field visit to verify these applications. And quickly to go into some major challenges that we confronted in scaling up social protection. We see that if the lockdown continue for much longer, the availability of funds may be an issue. Human resources to do the actual processing of application will be an issue. And of course, from time to time, the ministry has had to shut down units as a result of persons being impacted in one way or the other from someone or being a COVID positive. What we had was a lot of duplication taking place and some fraudulent claims. What we also saw was there was some of the challenges is an unregulated arrangement governing rental of private residence. The informal sector, a sizable portion of the person that we dealt with was from the informal sector. So getting verified information from the informal sector was also a challenge. 58.4% of the application was from the informal sector. And there were some gaps in information technology that prevented us from working as quickly as we wanted to work. Quickly onto some of the things that we can build on. We are saying that programs are available. We believe that in going forward, in order to prepare for further shocks of this nature and other shocks, programs should be of a resilience nature. A resilience model should be pursued, where savings and unemployment insurance and micro insurances might be a feature of the social protection landscape. We believe as well that a central beneficiary registry linked to the Elections and Boundaries Commission, Immigration, the National Insurance Board, and the Board of Inland Revenue will be a critical feature, and to invest in tools that will support decision-making in this integrated management information system, as well as we feel that opportunities going forward should be the introduction of a disaster and shock responsive fund. That is, as it relates to my presentation, I want to thank you very much.
Thanks again, Mr. Gangapersad. Very important points that you raised there around coordination. You did very well. It sounded like you were very well coordinated in these efforts, but a number of challenges, including managing the COVID-19 pandemic as an ongoing process. I'd like to move now towards the Eastern Caribbean, to the island of St. Lucia, represented by Mrs. Velda Octave Joseph. Mrs. Joseph has been involved in the areas of disaster management and social development for over 2 decades. Currently, she's a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Equity, Social Justice, Local Government and Empowerment, having been transferred from the National Emergency Management Organization in St. Lucia since 2018. In her present capacity, Mrs. Joseph has general oversight over the ministry's wide-ranging program portfolio and provides critical guidance for the effective and efficient delivery of various social assistance programs to vulnerable populations. During her tenure in NEMO, Mrs. Joseph functioned as a director of the organization and was therefore responsible for developing and implementing programs for reducing risk and building resilience, as well as for coordinating emergency response to hazard impacts when necessary. Her disaster management experience was also enriched by several relevant direct engagements, both locally and abroad. Mrs. Joseph, please continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliette. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit on what St. Lucia has been doing as it relates to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. I will begin my presentation on very familiar grounds. I think we all know of the impact of COVID-19 on various sectors and at various levels, because really and truly all of our countries have been exposed. But as social development practitioners, we are very concerned about that impact on the poor and the vulnerable. St. Lucia is no different. We have suffered tremendously because, as you may also know, St. Lucia's economy is heavily reliant on tourism, and so you can understand the impact of a halt in visitor arrivals on the economy of St. Lucia. I will also share statistics as it relates to our level of poverty. And in 2016, before the pandemic, we recognized, based on our data, that 1 in 4 persons, 25% of our population, was deemed to be poor. And so you would recognize that in a situation like this, in the situation that we're experiencing currently, we of course would be very concerned about the impact and how we treat with our vulnerable persons. For us, it was clear at the ministry that any comprehensive response would need to look closely at how we can leverage social protection to provide some sort of relief to the poor, the vulnerable, and the new poor, or the new vulnerable as we call them, those who had just lost their jobs or persons who had been impacted in some way as a result of COVID-19. And so for us, in developing the economic recovery and resilience plan, we were adamant that social protection should be one of the core pillars. In determining what is it that we offer to our nationals on a whole, we looked at 3 key areas. We looked at income support, food security, and psychosocial support. As it relates to income support, we at the time envisaged 2 main areas that we could leverage social protection to provide that type of relief that we thought was required. We looked at horizontal expansion of the public assistance program. The public assistance program is our largest cash transfer program. Currently, there are 2,600 households receiving benefits under this program. We sought to expand that program, and as you would have heard from Sarah, we are looking to expand that program by 1,000 additional households, bringing it up to a total of 3,600 households. We also looked at the issue of vertical expansion, and we looked at a number of the vulnerable groups that we serve currently. We looked at the Child Disability Grant Program. Under that program, we have 312 individuals benefiting. We thought that we needed to top up that group so that they're able to get a little more resources to support their needs. We also looked at an increase to the stipend that is being provided to children in foster care, as well as persons living with HIV. For the persons living with HIV, we do not give direct cash, but we use a voucher system to provide food support to that target group. In all of those cases that I've mentioned, we provided an additional amount, an additional value of 100 Eastern Caribbean dollars. I have to indicate that at the time, we really did not know what would be the appropriate transfer value to be impactful as it relates to providing relief to those particular households. We simply, arbitrarily, if I should say so, came up with a figure of 100 Eastern Caribbean dollars. And so as part of our programming and as part of our planning going forward, we are, with the support of UNICEF, looking at how we model various scenarios so that we would have a sort of a benchmark or a more scientific approach in determining what is the top up that we need to give to individual households so that we can actually be making a difference, that we can actually impact those households. We also, so these are the 2 programs that we currently have that we sought to tweak to suit the situation, but we also implemented a number of new programs. We had an income support program for non-NIC contributors, and NIC is our National Insurance Corporation. There are persons who were not who were not contributors of the NIC, but who had lost their jobs as a result of the impact of COVID-19. And so a program was put together to provide support to these households for a period of 3 months. $500 was provided for a 3-month period. That program has actually supported over 4,000 individuals, and we have spent pretty close to 7 million Eastern Caribbean dollars. We are coming to the end of that particular initiative because, as I said, it was for a three-month period. And we simply have one remaining batch of about 800 persons to process, and that would conclude that particular program. In rolling out this initiative, of course, it's a new one, and we had to make some adjustments and some changes to our current operations. What we sought to do was to bring in additional resources, additional human resources for vetting, for processing. And we did that by utilizing existing government entities. So the Ministry of Tourism really did the frontline vetting and processing on our behalf. And then that was shared with this ministry to do a final vetting and verification before processing for payment. We also engaged the NIC through an MOU, through a signed MOU arrangement, because we wanted to discourage double dipping. We didn't want situations of persons benefiting from the NIC and then coming to the government program, the government income support program, to also benefit from that. So we would also share the data with the NIC, and they would indicate whether those persons had already been benefited or not. That served quite well because we did recognize a number of persons who had benefited and were not eligible under our program. We also augmented our educational assistance program. We have an agency of the ministry called the St. Lucia Social Development Fund. That entity annually implements an educational assistance program. However, we projected increased demand as a result of COVID-19, and we submitted a memo to Cabinet requesting augmentation of that budget to allow us to meet the demands out there. Cabinet approved that request and provided an additional $3 million to support educational assistance. We have implemented the first tranche of that at a cost of $1.5 million, and we are about to roll out the second tranche for the additional $1.5 million. We are in the process of implementing an electricity assistance program where we will be providing some relief in the form of 75 Eastern Caribbean dollars to a number of persons, and we have the criteria very clearly set out: persons who had benefited from the income support, persons who are on the public assistance program, persons who are from households where you have HIV, persons living with HIV, and persons who are in foster care. So those groups will receive a reprieve in terms of payment on their electricity bills. That program is set to be implemented as of October 2020, which means that we will be covering utility bills, electricity bills from September 2020. We also facilitated a rental assistance program. This is not a core program of the ministry. However, we had circumstances where persons came to the ministry seeking assistance, persons who were about to be evicted, persons who had been evicted. And so I believe that persons who are in desperate need of help should be helped. This is the ministry that is mandated to assist persons in those situations. And so we sort of made an exception and provided rental accommodation for these individuals. In many instances, we tried it on a short-term basis, so we did contracts for 6 months, but of course we have made provisions for expansion of that if necessary, because we do envisage that in the very short term, nothing significant may change to change the plight of these individuals. So these are some of the new programs that we established in collaboration with the others that we had. As it relates to the food support or food security, we, from very early in April, we began a hot meals program, and we provided a hot meal to vulnerable households, poor households, on a weekly basis. It happened every Sunday. And we provided anywhere between 1,000 to 3,000 households with that meal on a Sunday. We also distributed a number of food packages, and that was done in collaboration with the Office of the Prime Minister. We looked at obtaining ground provisions, meat, fish, etc., from our farmers, our fishers, and we provided a food package to households on a weekly basis as well, with a lot of our locally produced food items. We also provided support to a number of homeless individuals. In fact, what we did was to establish a temporary homeless shelter where we ensured that persons were fed, persons were clothed, persons were cared for in terms of health, and that persons received the care that they required. So that was also established in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The other pillar, the psychosocial support, we from very early facilitated the activation of the Stress Management Committee of NIMO. That committee is actually headed by the Director of the Division of Human Services, which falls under the Ministry of Equity. And we brought together a team of trained persons to provide support, psychosocial support to individuals who may need such assistance. We also had a hotline at the Division of Human Services for persons, for children who would want to call to just ask questions or to speak to one of the social workers there on the issue and the impact of the issue of the pandemic on their circumstances. There was a general hotline, a 311 hotline, where persons, anybody could also call requesting assistance from the government of St. Lucia. So really for us, in terms of changes, there were not significant changes made, but in so much as I have mentioned in terms of the new programs, new systems needed to be put in place. So MOUs were signed with the entities that were required. We enlisted volunteers, we enlisted other government entities to provide the human resource support that were required to roll out these initiatives. But in terms of challenges, I can share a few of the challenges that we had. Of course, the resource availability is always an issue. We do not have a contingent fund for disaster management, neither for social protection issues. And so the issue of reallocating from one head to another, and the issue of actually having available resources, given that our revenues would have declined considerably, meant that we could not roll out all of those initiatives as we would have liked to. For some of them, we have to make sure that we actually have the resources to be able to implement. I am happy to say that for all of those that I've mentioned, we have been able to implement all of them, or we are about to implement. The only program that we thought of at the time that we have not implemented, and we still do not know how we're going to implement it, was really a backyard gardening program that we wanted to engage our clients in. We thought of providing seedlings to these individuals and encouraging everybody to plant something so that they could augment their food supply, but we have not advanced on that particular one. So the issue of resources was a challenge, of course. Data requirements, that was an issue for us. at the height of COVID for St. Lucia, we got a lot of requests for particular data sets, and we had issues in terms of very quickly being able to provide that. I can report here that we have made some progress in that regard. We got some assistance from UNICEF, and we were able to ensure that we have complete data sets and data sets where we could readily manipulate to provide the information that we require. In the initial, in terms of payment for public assistance clients, we do have a group of clients that we pay over the counter. We do face-to-face payments, and it was a huge concern in terms of how we actually go out to provide, the resources to those individuals. We did so, but it brought us to the point where we had to consider whether or not, and how would you proceed if you have an impact that you really cannot get to that point to provide the cash transfer to the individual. How would you make sure that they receive that cash transfer? In terms of opportunities, I think it's an opportunity for us to review our systems and our plans as to how we leverage social protection and how we are able to do that very quickly. How can we upscale whatever systems that we have in a very quick time frame. It speaks to our data systems and the need for a social registry. It is something that we do not have at the moment, but it would, of course, have helped us in very quickly being able to expand our public assistance program, for example, or being able to identify who are the other vulnerable persons that we need to immediately target for various forms of support, or how can we verify the requests that are coming to us via different persons in communities. And of course, we are now discussing with the CDB issues of unemployment insurance. We are also considering the opportunity that we have to make a very strong case for having a contingency fund for disaster management and for handling social protection issues. I want to thank the WFP at this forum, because the WFP has provided tremendous support, both in terms of technical assistance as well as financial assistance for some of our programs, particularly persons living with HIV, and for the expansion of the PAP program. And I want to just publicly thank Regis and his team, Sarah, Francesca, for providing that support to us and for being there with us throughout our response, throughout the implementation of our response initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Joseph, for sharing the experience of St. Lucia. Again, it seems very much like the need for a multi-pronged approach, not only for food, there's income support, as well as psychosocial support. Also the opportunity to do so in multiple ways, whether it is a vertical expansion, allowing for more income or for more food, or horizontal to include some of the new persons under the public assistance program. I'd like to move on then to hear from Ms. Petrona Davies. She's the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Social Development in the British Virgin Islands. Ms. Davies brings over 30 years of significant and varied experience as a public officer in the government of the British Virgin Islands and has served as Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Social Development for just over a decade. Among many responsibilities, she oversees the largest government budget allocation in the BVI, directing the drafting of multiple pieces of landmark legislation, coordinated major infrastructural projects, and oversaw the development of the Virgin Islands National Health Insurance System. Ms. Davies is an accomplished executive with a strong commitment to improving the lives of others and demonstrated ability to deliver results. Ms. Davies, please proceed.
Thank you so much, Juliette, and hello to everyone. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about the work that is happening in the British Virgin Islands in terms of our social protection response to COVID-19. As you know, being the Ministry of Health and Social Development, it has been a very exciting year, to say the least. I begin by pointing out that both of our economic pillars in the Virgin Islands, financial services and tourism, were affected relatively quickly by the COVID-19 crisis, with a large portion of our business in financial services originating in the Asia region, and a significant portion of our labor force directly employed in the tourism sector. So in addition to the Health Emergency Operations Center, the government established an Economic Stability Task Force, and a key aspect of the strategy produced focused on social protection interventions. The most far-reaching public health intervention to date was a 24-hour curfew or lockdown that was instituted in April, which helped to interrupt and suppress the spread of the virus, but also contributed to severe societal disruption, further losses of incomes, as well as economic contraction overall. It was estimated at that time that earnings of over 11,000 employees had been affected by disruptions just to the tourism industry alone. A major feature of the context in which our pandemic response is taking place is a fairly reliable social protection system against a backdrop of historically low unemployment levels. Universal health coverage is largely achieved through mandatory enrollment in the National Health Insurance System, which ensures access to affordable health care. Social insurance coverage is available to the formal as well as the informal workforce through compulsory as well as voluntary contributions to the Social Security Board. Further to that, the Public Assistance Program offers grants which are delivered through the Social Development Department, and there are also various protections for workers, the majority of whom are migrants, enshrined in the Virgin Islands Labor Code. So in this direct response to COVID-19, several additional social protection measures have been implemented, including labor market interventions such as grants to businesses to promote continued employment. These measures have mainly been funded by the central government through its emergency and contingency funds, and the Social Security Board as part of an economic stimulus package. So the first round of assistance to households came in the form of in-kind relief and fee waivers during the initial lockdown periods. Initiatives such as grocery provisioning, food vouchers, expanded feeding services, free water delivery, and amnesties on water and electricity bill payments helped to ensure that basic needs could continue to be met during that time. Now, as movement restrictions were gradually relaxed, the next stage of our response saw the introduction of a new unemployment and underemployment grant program, which started at the beginning of June. Now, this program was funded through a $10 million grant from the Social Security Board for persons who have either lost their jobs or working fewer hours or for less pay as a direct result of the COVID-19 crisis. But to qualify, a person must have been working for at least 1 year prior to the 30th of March 2020 and have paid a minimum number of Social Security contributions leading up to that date. So while this unemployment program provides redress for a large number of persons, there's still a segment of the working population whose needs will go unmet by that program. In fact, over 2,100 of the applications that have been processed so far have been deemed ineligible. So to help meet the coverage gap, an income support program has been designed with the kind assistance of WFP and other partners to be administered by the Social Development Department. That program is awaiting formal approval. So while it's still linked to employment history, the program is designed to be needs-based and is not restricted by the level of contributions paid to the Social Security system. So grants will range from $500 US to $1,000 per month to be provided to eligible households over a period of 3 months. A similar program had been developed and initiated as a result of the devastating impacts of Hurricanes Irma and Maria. The then Household Assistance Program basically provided a joint cash platform for a number of NGOs partnering with the Ministry of Health and Social Development to pool financial resources and human resources in order to rapidly develop financial assistance to persons in need. Its use of unconditional cash grants has been touted as a best practice and described as being an efficient and effective way to meet the needs of people and also to stimulate the economy. So in designing this new income relief program for COVID-19, lessons learned from the design and implementation of the post-hurricane program have been considered and applied. It's true that affected residents who may not apply will not qualify under either program. So persons who don't qualify under the unemployment program or the income support program may be able to access financial assistance through COVID-19 grants being administered by elected members of the House of Assembly. So even as we build on existing systems and apply lessons from past experiences, the rapid onset and unprecedented nature of this pandemic have created significant challenges in scaling up social protection to meet increasing needs over a protracted period. So while no one could predict how long these economic disruptions will persist, the resources available to the country are finite, and therefore they need to be managed assiduously. So in addition to these financial constraints and considerations, agencies have been challenged to rapidly implement new programs, new procedures, new technologies to efficiently manage the delivery of benefits. And as my colleague mentioned, in the absence of shared data systems and databases and delivery systems, considerable effort must also be expended to ensure that applicants are first directed to the correct programs, and also that agencies are able to collaborate effectively to ensure the most efficient use of the available resources. Looking ahead, the current crisis should further propel the BVI social protection systems towards greater adaptability and shock responsiveness. So in addition to proposals to include unemployment coverage as a permanent feature of our social security system, greater attention should be paid to issues such as employee paid leave rights going forward. The Ministry of Health and Social Development will also apply the lessons from this pandemic in revising the National Social Protection Policy and the legal framework, the development of a social protection information system and implementation tools, and the execution of MOUs and other standby arrangements with public and private sector partners, NGOs, as well as development and humanitarian actors to ensure efficient rollout going forward. We believe that these strategic initiatives will better position the territory to build resilience so as to absorb and manage future shocks in ways that ensure that people's needs are met while maintaining their dignity. So with these few words, I'd like to end here and say thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Davies, to ensure that people's needs are met while they maintain dignity. I think that's very beautifully put. Again, the themes of disaster risk finance become an issue, particularly as the crisis continues. Data and information management is also very crucial as we move forward, particularly in ensuring that persons who slip through the cracks are able to receive the support they need, and that there's no kind of double dipping, as it were. Thank you so much for that. Finally, I want to welcome Ms. Suzette Morris. She's the Director of Social Security in the Social Security Division of the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. She brings over 20 years of service to the public sector, and over the last 3 years, she's been responsible for directing the programs the National Insurance Scheme and the Public Assistance Department of the Ministry. Her current responsibilities require collaborating with international, regional, and national organizations and institutions like the International Social Security Association, the International Labour Organization, the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, World Food Programme, the Planning Institute of Jamaica, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, to ensure the effective implementation of the National Social Protection Strategy. Thank you, Ms. Morris. Please proceed.
Thank you, Juliette. Thank you and good afternoon. We appreciate the opportunity to share the Jamaican experience so far with COVID-19. I will be sharing my screen because I have a short PowerPoint presentation.
I can present the PowerPoint if you want, Suzette. Let me see, and let me know if it works.
You're not seeing my screen?
No, let me okay. Present my and let me know if it works. Okay.
Okay. I'm not.
Just 1 second, please. I'm sorry for the delay.
Okay. We're ready?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So Jamaica had our first COVID-19 case on March 2020, March 10, 2020. And on the 14th of March, we had 2 communities placed under quarantine. And at this point, our social protection response kicked in. Next slide. So, consistent with our National Social Protection Strategy 2014, Jamaica is utilizing a multi-sectoral, multifaceted, and multidimensional approach to the COVID-19 response. This includes collaboration among stakeholders from government, private sector, civil society, and our international partners. The response mechanisms include welfare, cash and in-kind transfers to alleviate hardship and bolster food security and hygiene needs. We've expanded shelter and accommodation for the homeless, and we also have compliance waivers, among other things. The Ministry of Labor and Social Security is Jamaica's main social protection provider. And we have an island-wide network of offices providing social services with over 135 social workers, and we also have some 2,000 volunteers from our humanitarian assistance partners. So for the interest of this presentation, I will be focusing on the programs administered by the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So our public assistance program is the program that is at the forefront of disaster response. The MLSS chairs the Humanitarian Assistance Committee of the Disaster Risk Management Council, and we are the lead agency for National Disaster Relief Response, the National Disaster Relief Response Program. In relation to the COVID-19 efforts, our partners, we have partnered with our other humanitarian actors, and we have been providing food packages to families in quarantine, communities in quarantine, and other families who have expressed need for food support in the pandemic. So at this point, we have distributed over 40,000 food packages. We have distributed hygiene packages, children packages, and fresh produce that we have gotten through partnership with our Ministry of Agriculture and the Rural Agricultural Development Agency. One of the changes that we saw in this respect was the introduction of a standardized prepackaged food package and hygiene kits also. And these we package from our Central Foods Warehouse in Kingston in collaboration with our partners, especially the Jamaica Red Cross. Our flagship conditional cash transfer path also saw some responses in relation to COVID-19. So path primarily makes bi-monthly payments in February, April, June, August, and so on. So our April payment was made a little bit early to ease some of the food needs of our path beneficiaries. Additionally, there was under the government's CARE program, and that is our COVID allocation response for employees. The program was primarily administered by our Ministry of Finance, but our path beneficiaries got an additional payment in May. Our path program is a conditional cash transfer, but for the purposes of our COVID response, we waived the school and health compliance requirements, so all beneficiaries were paid full benefits. There was also an increase in the back-to-school payment in August. So back-to-school payment across all categories was increased by 5,000 Jamaican dollars, and this included a payment to early childhood beneficiaries that would normally not have been. Our beneficiaries who are paid primarily by checks in all large post offices, and by large post offices, we're speaking about post offices serving beneficiaries of over 1,000. We migrated them to the remittance mode of payment in order to ease some of the crowds and to allow for social distancing. There was coordination with the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information to facilitate school feeding grants, and that would be to offset the meals that would have been provided to path children had they been in school. We also partnered with UNICEF to provide grants for 2,000 children with disabilities and 760 pregnant and lactating women on path. And we are also in the process of distributing food packages to families of children with disabilities, courtesy of UNICEF. Our National Council for Senior Citizens and Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. The Senior Citizens Council has also been distributing care packages, and in instances where we have shut-in elderlies, we have been providing hot meals. So we have distributed over 4,500 care packages to 3,311 seniors. Some of these persons are persons we serve weekly. We have also distributed over 2,000 packages to persons with disabilities, and under the CARE program, we are providing cash grants to 2,000 persons with disabilities. One of our private sector partners, Digicel, has also provided 610 tablets for teachers and students with disabilities. As far as our national insurance scheme is concerned, we have early encashments. So pensioners who receive payment by voucher are paid fortnightly. Since the onset of COVID, pensioners have been allowed to cash all fortnightly vouchers in the first week of the month, so that they will only have to come out once per month. And we have also significantly advanced electronic payment to our national insurance pensioners. So as it is per cycle, we are onboarding an additional 4,000 pensioners, and that would be about a third of the population being currently served by vouchers. as it relates to our challenges and our opportunities. So we looked at the challenges that we faced, and in every challenge almost we saw an opportunity. So we observed that our social protection practitioners lacked training and expertise in responding to public health disasters. So we see an opportunity there for institutional strengthening in relation to responding to not just public health disasters, but other new and emerging types of disasters. Not just training for our social workers, but also the tools that we use, in particular our damage assessment tool, to adapt the tool to be able to collect data and information in relation to other types of disasters outside of the natural disasters that we are used to responding to. So we noticed that there were several limitations also in administering shock responsive social protection. One of them being how fragmented and unstructured the information we had, and that is in relation to socioeconomic and demographic information. So we were responding to communities in quarantine, but the information we got was very unstructured and fragmented. And we did not have sufficient information in some instances on our vulnerable populations. So we have seen again the need for a national identification system and a comprehensive database of vulnerable persons. So it has caused us again to look seriously at the need for a social registry. We have seen difficulties in expanding coverage as payment modalities are mostly by check. And in a situation where you don't want persons gathering and you don't want the passing of paper, we have seen an opportunity to escalate. So we were phasing in electronic payment, but with the onset of COVID-19, we have escalated the transition to electronic modes of payment. So I said earlier, we moved the larger post offices to remittance, and we are in the process now of onboarding the larger portion of our clients to some electronic payment mode. Data collection was also an issue for us because our data collection modalities were more paper-based, and therefore we will also use that as an opportunity to expedite moving to more electronic means of data capture. We also saw an opportunity in that since our COVID response and we've been in the field, we have been able to identify significant number of vulnerable persons that were not on any of our registries. So that we have seen as an opportunity. The coverage gaps for some vulnerable groups also was very apparent. And as an opportunity, we have seen the need to expand our social security to include unemployment insurance and to also fast track the introduction of a social pension. We also have a concern in terms of our limitation with psychosocial support, both for our social workers and the populations we serve. So we see an opportunity to strengthen the mechanisms for psychosocial support. And we also see an opportunity to strengthen our collaboration with other MDAs and with the private sector. So in conclusion, as we learn in Jamaica to live with COVID-19, we recognize the hardships that the disease has created. However, we remain committed to leveraging the opportunities presented to ensure that Jamaica's social protection system will recover strong on the other side of the pandemic. Thank you.
In putting systems in place. At this point, I'd like to thank the panelists again for their contributions, and to segue perhaps in closing, because we have another 15 minutes or so, to a central question, if I may, for each of you to consider. Given the fact that the Caribbean is vulnerable to economic shocks and also natural hazards, what is one key step, do you think, that you could do to strengthen the role of shock responsive social protection for your country in the future? I'd like to start the round again and start with Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Gangapersad. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much. And I think that one of the key thread from all of the panelists is that need for that social beneficiary registry. I think is a key element in terms of moving forward, recognizing that sometimes the process by which we deliver services is not what we currently do right now. Our process would entail validation of application. And I think that what we need is a registry that will allow us to validate, or at least to know persons in greater detail, so that when shock responsive measures need to be implemented, we can do so very quickly. Over the course of the last couple of months, we were able to provide assistance to 170,000 families. But I must say that it took some time in mining the data to identify these families. And certainly it is something that we need to be a little bit more proactive and to establish that central beneficiary registry. Of course, with connecting to the relevant agencies that will allow us to be effective, meaning the National Insurance Board, Immigration, the Board of Inland Revenue, and those sort of agencies that are key players in the social sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to Ms. Joseph.
Thank you very much, Juliette. So I would wholeheartedly support what my colleague from Trinidad has said in terms of ensuring that we have this database that provides you with information on vulnerable households so that you're very quickly able to verify and you're quickly able to identify the persons that you need to target, which of course would redound to being able to scale up at a moment's notice. However, I also want to speak to our planning. I think also often we see planning in silos. So we talk a lot about disaster management and we talk about social protection as separate entities. So I want to advance the argument of ensuring that when we work with our individuals, work with our population, work with vulnerable groups, we are seeking to build resilience to multi-hazards. We need to begin to look at the issue of multi-hazards, being able to respond to not just natural hazards or hurricanes as we've conditioned ourselves to, but we need to recognize and we need to train our individuals. We need to inculcate in our population that we are preparing ourselves. We are to build resilience to dealing with shocks in general, whether they're financial, whether it's economic, whether it is natural hazards, but that you're planning at the household level, at the individual level, and at national levels. We need to consider the concept of multi-hazard planning. And aligned to that, I want to talk about the contingency funds. We've been talking about it for a very long time. It is not good enough for us to resort to a reallocation of funds to be able to deal with emergencies and to be able to deal with disasters. We need to plan for it. So we need to ensure that we have within our national budget that we need to consider what are the contingencies such that we are able to respond very quickly from a national perspective while we, await support elsewhere.
Many thanks. Ms. Davies, what's your perspective?
Thank you, Juliette. Those were excellent points, and I certainly support them wholeheartedly. I think in addition to that, we have to look at strengthening our delivery systems, primarily through the use of technology. Even in the chaos that followed Hurricane Irma, we were able to use electronic tools and applications in the field that you could process information very quickly and be able to act on that information. So I was a bit disheartened to see other agencies in the context of COVID-19 resorting to paper and people coming in and, just at a time when you should be social distancing, I think it's a great opportunity to see how we can modernize our systems and make use of the tools that are quite readily available and affordable in most cases. And I think we just have to bring social protection. This pandemic should serve as a springboard to bring social protection to the forefront and encourage our governments to make the necessary investments so that going forward, we can easily spring into action regardless of the nature of the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davies. And finally, Ms. Morris. Thank you.
So I agree with my colleagues. I think the primary opportunity for us is the social registry. And like my colleague from the BVI said, electronic payments. So certainly in the advent of such a disaster as this, the need for the improvement in the financial inclusion of the poor and vulnerable has come to the forefront. So we definitely need to prioritize having the registry and moving our clients to more electronic means of payment.
Thanks to all. It does appear very strong that we share similar challenges. The social registry has come across very strong, that information management, knowing who we're targeting, planning and coordination, the ability to do so in a multi-hazard context is also extremely crucial, especially at that household, from the household level right back up. I really love that intervention. Disaster risk financing, something that we in WFP really focus on, really advocate for national contingency funds along with other options for disaster risk financing, recognizing that COVID-19 will take a long time to go, and certainly we're in the midst of hurricane season still. And finally, the delivery systems. How can we leverage technology to do things in a more innovative way, particularly given this COVID-19 and social distancing priorities? So thank you very much to our panelists again. I would like to move towards closing. And I invite our colleague Gianpiero Leonarcini, the representative of CAF in Trinidad and Tobago, to end the session for us. Thanks again, colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all our panelists, to the speakers. I think this has been a very comprehensive review of the challenge the region has faced during this year and of the response that has been provided. Undoubtedly, the pandemic has impacted food security and social protection in the Caribbean. By reducing the income of families, by affecting the jobs of people, and especially the most vulnerable. And we have seen through the presentations of the 4 government representatives of Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, St. Lucia, and the British Virgin Islands, that governments have responded very effectively through expansion of social protection mechanisms, have faced many challenges, but have managed to provide a very significant assistance in this challenging period. And also with the support of international organizations, such as the remarkable role of the World Food Program in assisting the region. And well, may I say, CAF has also provided emergency support to its member countries. For instance, here in the Caribbean, we provided $100 million in emergency budget support to Barbados and $150 million to Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, these resources serve to finance the budget needs in this social emergency. Now, as you were mentioning, this experience provides us with important lessons. Very importantly, as was highlighted by the World Food Program, to develop shock responsive social protection systems, I think, is a key lesson of this period, that need to be prepared for the unexpected, has been made evident throughout this year. Also, in all the presentations, we have consistently heard the need for better data management, the need for digital transformation, to have more efficient social protection systems, and that is something that we've all been made aware of in these difficult times. And probably this has been less mentioned, but the need for strengthening local food production, not just be so dependent on imports that affect our economic perspectives and balance of payments, but also to make more resilient social tissues by empowering the local farmers. I think that is also one challenge for these coming years. So finally, I want to say that in CAF we are very, very happy about this partnership. We hope this event has been useful for all those who are listening to us. We in CAF stand always ready to provide the financial and technical assistance that our member countries require. And we believe that knowledge generation and dialogue with our partners is also part of one of the key elements to providing effective assistance. So thank you once again, and we are always at your disposition to continue this dialogue and collaboration to promote sustainable development. Thank you.